Hi, fourth grade. I'm glad you're back. So, today we're going to read chapter 11 of the Phantom Tollbooth. And just to recap a little bit, so we have Milo, Talk, and the Humbug going on a quest to find rhyme and reason and bring them back to Dictionopolis. So, in our last chapter, Milo was traveling along and they ended up going to see a symphony. And a symphony is where many different instruments go to play music. But this symphony was special because it did not play music, but it played colors. And they met Chiroma. And Chiroma was the man who was conducting. So he stands in front and he makes sure that all the instruments are playing the same rhythm and melody. But Chiroma, and we didn't talk about this yesterday, but the name actually means purity of color. So really pretty colors. And that's what they did, was they played color into the world instead of just playing music. So super interesting. So we last had Milo falling asleep, and Chiroma told him to wake him up for the sunrise, because they play all the colors for evening, noon, night, and he plays the sunrise as well. Chapter 11, Discord and Din. One by one the hours passed, and at exactly 5:22, by Talk's very accurate clock, Milo carefully opened one eye, and in a moment the other. Everything was still purple, dark blue, and black, yet scarcely a minute remained to the long, quiet night. He stretched lazily, rubbed his eyes, stretched his head, shivered once as a greeting to the early morning mist. "I must awake Chiroma for the sunrise," he said softly. Then he suddenly wondered what it would be like to lead an orchestra and to color the whole world himself. The idea whirled through his thoughts until he quickly decided that since it couldn't be very difficult, and since they probably all knew what to do by themselves anyway, and since it didn't seem a shame to wake anyone so early, and since it might be his only chance to try, and since the musicians were already poised and ready, he would, but just a little while. And so, as everyone slept peacefully on, Milo stood on his tiptoes, raised his arms slowly in front of him, and made the slightest movement possible with his index finger. It was now 5:23 a.m. As if understanding his signal perfectly, a single piccolo player, a single note, and off in the east a solitary shaft of gold lemon light flickered across the sky. Milo smiled happily and then casually crooked his finger again. This time more piccolos and a flute joined in, and 3 more rays of light danced lightly into view. Then, with both hands, he made great circular sweeps in the air and watched with delight as the musician began to play all at once. The cellos made the hills glow red, and the leaves and the grass were tipped with a soft pale green as the violins began their song. Only the bass fiddle rested as the entire orchestra washed the forest in color. Milo was overjoyed because they were all playing for him, and just the way they should. "Won't Chiroma be surprised?" he thought, signaling the musicians to stop. "I'll wake him now." But instead of stopping, they continued to play even louder than before until each color became more brilliant than he thought possible. Milo shielded his eyes with one hand and waved the other desperately, but the colors continued to grow brighter and brighter and brighter until an even more curious thing began to happen. As Milo frantically conducted, the sky changed slowly from blue to tan, and then to a rich magenta red. Flurries of light green snow began to fall, and the leaves on the trees and bushes turned vivid orange. All the flowers suddenly appeared black, and the gray rocks became a lovely soft crimson. And even peacefully sleeping Talk changed from a brown to a magnificent ultramarine. Nothing was the color it should have been, and yet the more he tried to straighten things out, the worse it became. I wish I hadn't started, he thought unhappily, as pale blue blackbirds flew by. There he is conducting. There doesn't seem to be any way to stop them. He tried very hard to do everything just the way Troma had done, but nothing worked. The musicians played on faster and faster, and the purple sun raced quickly across the sky. In less than a minute, it had set once more in the west, and then without any pause risen again in the east. The sky was now quite yellow, and the grass was a charming shade of lavender. 7 times the sun rose and almost as quickly disappeared as the colors kept changing. In just a few minutes, a whole week had gone by. At last, the exhausted Milo, afraid to call for help and on the verge of tears, dropped to his hands to his side, and the orchestra stopped. The colors disappeared, and once again it was night. The time was 5:27 a.m. "Wake up, everybody! Time for sunrise!" he shouted with relief and quickly jumped from the music stand. "What a marvelous rest," said Troma, striding to the podium. I feel as though I've slept a week." My, I see we're a little late this morning. I'll have to cut my lunch hour short by 4 minutes." He tapped for attention, and this time the dawn proceeded perfectly. "You did a fine job," he said, patting Milo on his head. "Someday I'll let you conduct the orchestra yourself." Tock wagged his tail proudly, but Milo didn't say a word, and to this day no one knows for the lost week but a few people who happened to be awake at 5:23 on the very strange morning. "We'd better be getting along," said Tock, whose alarm had begun to ring again, "for there's still a long way to go." Troma nodded and a fond good day by as they all started back through the forest. In honor of the visit, he made all the wildflowers bloom in a breathtaking display. "I'm sorry you can't stay longer," said Alec. "There's so much more to see of the forest. But I suppose there's a lot to see everywhere if only you keep your eyes open." They walked for a while, all silent in their thoughts, until they reached the car, and Alec drew a fine telescope from his shirt and handed it to Milo. "Carry this with you on your journey," he said softly, "for there is much worth noticing that often escapes the eye. Through it you can see everything from a tender moss to a sidewalk crack, to the glow of the farthest star, and most important of all, you can see things as they really are, not just as they seem to be. It's my gift to you." Milo placed the telescope carefully on the glove compartment and reached up to shake Alex by the hand. Then he stepped on the starter and, with his head full of strange new thoughts, drove out the far end of the forest. The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them, and a series of dips and rises leapt up to the side of each crest. The slide and slid gently down the other in a way that made stomachs laugh and faces frown. As they topped the brow and the bow of the highest hill, a deep valley appeared ahead. The road, finally making up its mind, plummeted down, as if anxious to renew adequacy with the sparkling blue stream that flowed below. When they reached the floor of the valley, the wind grew stronger. As it funneled through the rocks, and directly ahead, a bright-colored speck grew larger and larger. "It looks like a wagon," cried Milo excitedly. "It's a wagon! A carnival wagon!" sounded Tock, and that's exactly what it was, parked on the side of the road. Painted bright red and looking quite deserted, on the side in enormous white letters, broided in black, was the inscription "Cacophonous A Discord." And cacophonous or cacophony is a word that means a loud noise. So it's a very loud, if something is cacophonous, if you describe it as cacophonous, it's a very loud sound. And discord is a word that talks about when a melody doesn't flow very well. So if a song has discord to it, then it doesn't have a very good melody or rhythm to it where it sounds pretty, like it has a flow. So cacophonous, so loud sound. A, discord. So this is a person who has very bad sounds. So they're unwanted sounds. And below, slightly smaller, black letters, broaded in white, was Doctor of Dissonance. And once again, dissonance also means like an unwanted, unpleasant melody, unpleasant sound. Perhaps if someone's at home, he might tell us how far we have to go, said Milo, parking next to the wagon. He tiptoed timidly up the 3 wooden steps to the door, tapped lightly, and leapt back in fright, for the moment he knocked, there was a terrible crash from inside the wagon that sounded as if the whole set of dishes had been dropped from the ceiling onto the hard stone floor. At the same time, the door flew open, and from the dark interior, a hoarse voice inquired, "Have you ever heard a whole set of dishes drop from ceiling onto a hard stone floor?" Milo, who had tumbled back off the step, sat up quickly, while Talk and the Humbug rushed from the car to see what had happened. "Well, have you?" insisted the voice, which was so raspy that it made you want to clear your own throat. "Not until now," replied Milo, getting to his feet. "Ha! I thought not," said the voice happily. Have you ever heard an ant wearing 4 slippers walking across a thick wool carpet?" And before they could answer, he went in his strange, croaking way. "Well, don't just stand there in the cold. Come in. It's lucky you happened by. None of you look well." The faint glow of the ceiling lamp dimly illuminated the wagon as they cautiously stepped inside. Talk first, eager to defend against all dangers, Milo next, frightened but curious, and the Humbug last, ready at any moment to run for his life. "That's right, now let's have a look at you," he said. "Tut, tut, tut. Very bad, a serious case." The dusty wagon was lined with shelves full of curious boxes and jars of the kind found in an old apothecary shop. It looked as though it hadn't been swept out in years. Bits and pieces of equipment lay strewn all over the floor, and at the rear was a heavy wooden table covered with books, bottles, and bric-a-brac. Have you ever heard a blindfolded octopus unwrap a cellophane-covered bathtub? He inquired again as the air was filled with loud, crinkling, snapping sounds. Sitting at the table, busily mixing and measuring with the man who had invited them in, he was wearing a long white coat with a stethoscope around his neck and a small round mirror attached to his forehead, and the only really noticeable thing about him was his tiny mustache and enormous ears, each of which was fully as large as his head. "Are you a doctor?" asked Milo, trying to feel as well as possible. "I am Cacophonous A. Discord, Doctor of Dissonance," roared the man, and as he spoke, several small explosions and grinding crashes were heard. And there's a picture of him. He's got some big ears. "What does the A stand for?" stammered the nervous bug, too frightened to move. "As loud as possible," bellowed the doctor, and 2 screeches and a bump accompanied his response. "Now step a little closer and stick out your tongues." "Just as I suspected," he continued, opening a large dusty book and thumbing through the pages. "You're suffering from a severe lack of noise." He began to jump around the wagon, snatching bottles from shelves until he had a large assortment in various colors and sizes collected at the end of the table. All were neatly labeled: loud cries, soft cries, bangs, bongs, smashes, crashes, swishes, swooshes, snaps and crackles, whistles and gongs, squeaks, squawks, and miscellaneous uproar. After pouring a little of each into a large glass beaker, he stirred the mixture thoroughly with a wooden spoon, watching intently as it smoked and steamed and boiled and bubbled. "Be ready in a moment," he explained, rubbing his hands. Milo had never seen such an unpleasant-looking medicine and wasn't at all anxious to try it. "Just what kind of a doctor are you?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, you might say I'm a specialist," said the doctor. "I specialize in noise. All kinds, from the loudest to the softest, and from the slightest annoying to the terribly unpleasant. For instance, have you ever heard a square-wheeled steamroller riding over a street full of hard-boiled eggs?" he asked, and as he did, all that could be heard were loud crunching sounds. "But who would want those terrible noises?" asked Milo, holding his ears. "Everybody does," said the surprised doctor. "They're very popular today. Why, I'm kept so busy I can hardly fill the orders from nose pills, rackin' lotion, clamor salve, and hubbub tonic. That's all people seem to want these days." He stirred the beaker of the liquid a few more times, and then, as the steam cleared, he continued, Business wasn't always so good. Years ago, everyone wanted pleasant sounds, and except for a few orders during wars and earthquakes, things were very bad. But then the big cities were built, and there was a great need for honking horns, screeching trains, clanging bells, deafening shouts, piercing shrieks, gargling drains, and all the rest of those wonderfully unpleasant sounds we use so much of today. Without them, people would be very unhappy, so I make sure that they get as much as they want. Why, if you take a little of my medicine every day, you will never have to hear a beautiful sound again. Here, try some." "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather not," said the humbug, backing away to the far corner of the wagon. "I don't want to be cured of beautiful sounds," insisted Milo. "Besides," growled Talk, who decided that he didn't much like Dr. Discord, there's no such illness as lack of noise." "Of course not," replied the doctor, pouring himself a small glass of liquid. "That's what makes it so difficult to cure. I only treat illnesses that don't exist. That way, if I can't cure them, there's no harm done. Just one of the precautions of the trade," he continued, and seeing that no one was able to take his medicine, he again reached towards the shelf, removed a dark amber bottle, and dusted it carefully and placed it on the table in front of him. "Very well. If you want to go through life suffering from the noise deficiency, I give you the dine for his lunch. I'll give it to the dine for his lunch," he said, and he uncorked the bottle with the following sounding pop. For a moment everything was quiet, and Milo, Tonk, and Humbug looked intently at the bottle, wondering what Dr. Discord would do next. Then, very faintly at first, they heard a low rumbling that sounded miles away. It grew louder and louder and louder, and closer and closer and closer, until it became a deafening, ear-splitting roar that seemed to be coming from inside the tiny bottle. Then, from the bottle, a thick, blush smog spackled the ceiling, spread out, and gradually assumed the shape of a thick, blush smog with hands, feet, bright yellow eyes, and large frowning mouth. As soon as the smog had gotten completely out of the bottle, it grasped the beaker of liquid, tilted back what would have been its head if it really had one, and drank it all in 3 gulps. "Ah, that was good, master," he bellowed, shaking the whole wagon. "I thought you'd never let me out. Terribly cramped in there." And so the word dine's another word for very unpleasant, loud sounds. So that's what dine means. "This is my assistant Dine," said Dr. Discord. "You must forgive his appearance, for he really doesn't have any. You see, he is an orphan whom I raised myself without benefit of governess or any other assistance. For—" "No nurse is a good nurse," interrupted the Dime, doubling up with laughter. "If you can imagine a thick, blush smog doubling over in laughter." "For I found him," continued the doctor, ignoring the outburst, "living alone and unwanted in the abandoned soda bottle, without family or relatives." "No niece is a good niece," roared the Dine again, with a laugh that sounded like several sirens going off at once. He slapped at where his knee should have been. "And brought him here," continued the exasperated Discord, "where, despite his lack of shape or features, I trained. No noise is good noise," thundered the Dine. Once again he collapsed in another fit of hysterics and clutched his sides. "I trained him as my assistant in the business of conducting the dispense of noise," finished the doctor, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "No noise is good noise," exclaimed the humbug happily, trying to catch the spirit of things. "That's not funny at all," sobbed the Dine, who went to the corner to sulk. There's the Dine. Just some smoke, smog, foggy looking thing. "What is a Dine?" asked Milo, when he recovered from shock of seeing him appear. "You mean you've never met the awful Dine before?" said Dr. Discord in surprise. "Why, I thought everyone had. When you're playing in your room, making great amount of noise, what do they tell you to stop?" "That awful Dine," admitted Milo. "When the neighbors are playing their radio too loud late at night, what do you wish they'd turn down?" "That awful Dine," answered Talk. "When the street on your block is being repaired and the drills are working all day, what does everyone complain of?" "The dreadful row," volunteered the humbug delightfully. "The dreadful row," cried the anguished Dine, "was my grandfather. He perished in a great silence epidemic of 1712. Milo felt so sorry for the unhappy Dine that he gave him his handkerchief, which was immediately covered in bluish smog tears. "Thank you," groaned the Dine. "That was very kind, but I certainly can't understand why you don't like noise," he said. "Why, I heard an explosion last week that was so lovely I cried for 2 days." The very thought of it upset him so much that he began to sob all over again in a way that sounded almost exactly like a handful of fingernails being scratched across a mile-long blackboard. He buried his head in the doctor's lap. "He's very sensitive, isn't he?" asked Milo, trying to comfort the Dine. "It's true," agreed Dr. Discord, "but he's right, you know, that for noise is the most valuable thing in the world. King Azaz says words are," said Milo. "Nonsense," the doctor roared. "Why, when a baby wants food, how does it ask?" "He screams," answered the Dine, looking up happily. "And when an automobile wants gas, it chokes," he shouted again, jumping for joy. "When a river wants water, what does it do? It creaks." bellowed the Dine, as he collapsed into a fit of uncontrollable laughter. And what happens when a new day begins? It breaks, he gasped joyfully from the floor, a look of utter bliss covering his face. You see how simple it is, said the doctor to Milo, who didn't see at all, and then turning to tear-stained, smiling Dine, he remarked, Isn't it time for you to go? Where to? Asked Milo. Perhaps we're going the same way. I think not, the Dine replied, picking up an armful of empty socks from the table. For I'm going on my noise collection rounds. You see, once a day I travel throughout the kingdom and collect all the wonderful, horrible, and beautifully unpleasant noises that have been made, pack them into my sacks, and bring them back here for the doctor to make his medicines from. And a good job he does, said Dr. Discord, pounding his fists on the table. So wherever the noise is, that's where you'll find me, said the Dine, with an appreciative smile, and I must hurry along, for I understand that today there is to be a screech, several loud crashes, and a bit of pandemonium. And in which direction are you going? Asked the doctor, mixing another brew. To Dictionopolis, replied Milo. How unfortunate, said the Dine, shuffling towards the door. How very unfortunate, for then you must pass through the Valley of Sound. Is that bad? Asked the perpetually worried humbug. The Dine paused in the doorway with a look of extreme horror on his almost featureless face, and for the doctor shuddered in a way that sounded very much like a fast-moving freight train being derailed on a mountain. Well, you must ask, for you will find out soon enough, was all he would say, and sadly bade them farewell, and the Dine galloped off on his rounds. And that is the end of our chapter for today. Tomorrow we're going to read chapter 12. It's called The Silent Valley. So we'll see why the Dine did not like going there. And it sounds like from our next chapter title, The Silent Valley, he probably doesn't like it because there's probably no noise if it's silent. And I will see you then. You have a wonderful day.